Yesterday, the spokesman for the National Security Council, John Kirby, gave an extended extended press conference where he was explaining all kinds of things like he does all the time about national security and what the president's doing on this or that topic. And toward the end of it, it started, one of the reporters asked a question about, how is the United States going to be able to navigate and to manage and to balance the needs of our support to Ukraine, which has been, as long as it takes, we're going to give, whatever we need. We want to give $100 billion this year and all that kind of stuff, as well as now this additional requirement for Israel in their war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And Kirby had something to say very, very surprising. And I'm actually shocked. You're going to see the clip in just a second. I'm actually shocked that there wasn't any follow-up, because what he said here is monumental in its implications and importance. First, let me show you what he said, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
But in the near term, we've got appropriations and authorities for both Ukraine and for Israel. But you don't want to be trying to bake in long-term support when you're at the end of the rope. And in Ukraine, on the Ukraine funding, we're coming near to the end of the rope.
I mean, that's astounding. We're coming near to the end of the rope. All we've ever talked about is we will never leave Ukraine. We will be there as long as it takes. We will continue to support them. And now here's Kirby saying we're coming to the end of the rope and expressly saying we can't lock in long-term things. Now, that has profound implications for American national security and our policies as it relates to the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, look, the only way that Ukraine has been able to even survive this long has been this nonstop infusion of American money, American intelligence, American training, and scores of billions of dollars. And now then we're trying to get some more. And we saw what happened here in the United States politically when we had the government to avoid a shutdown. The House made a deal with Senate and with its own internal caucus to pass a continuing resolution to the 17th of November that did not include any of the Ukraine funding, because there's a strong and growing movement within the Republican Party, especially, that they don't want to continue this open-ended, open pocketbook support to Ukraine. Now, as we've said many times here on Deep Dive, we're not for this continued, nonstop flow into Ukraine, because it diminishes American national security capacity. And it can't help but do it when you have given, as we've talked about, 5,000 total combat vehicles out of American inventories into Ukraine, everything from Abrams tanks, Paladin self-propelled howitzers, the MRAPs, Humvees, supply trucks, you name it, all of these different kinds of classes of vehicles, Bradley, Strykers, top of the line stuff. It can't help but diminish our capacity. Well, a lot of that stuff has, of course, been blown up on the battlefield, as always happens in combat. And unless there is a continual steady promotion of that, more M777 howitzers, more Bradleys, more tanks to replace all the losses, Ukraine can't maintain its offensive, and they can't even maintain their operations. The offensive has effectively come to an end right now. They got through to a place called Robotina in actually late August, early September, and they haven't gone anywhere beyond that. And I think that they're probably out of steam. It's unlikely they're going to take anything more. They're definitely not going to get to even their middle objectives of Tokmak. But that really brings into focus what now? If the United States is now openly admitting we don't have the capacity to continue to just give weapons, ammunition, and everything else and money to the Ukraine side indefinitely. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a sustained long-term engagement. They just want to keep fighting, and they don't want to make any kind of negotiations. They don't want to give up any territory. They just want to keep fighting. Now, I have argued many times there is no path. There is no military path to victory for Ukraine. They are not going to be able to drive Russia out of its territory, all these occupied territories. They just don't have the personnel or the infrastructure or even the military potential to drive out an entrenched foe from 1,000-kilometer front all over that whole eastern part of their country. Now, that being the case, it is a foolish waste of resources, not just for the United States, but for NATO, to continue giving all of this support to Ukraine if all it's going to do is maybe create a stalemate because there's no path to victory. Well, the problem is, one of the many problems is that the West doesn't have the capacity to continue to provide this kind of support. Kirby is now saying it out loud. We've known it for a long time. They just haven't admitted it. Now he's saying this out loud. Then just a few days ago, you had a Dutch general who was one of the senior NATO leaders said, hey, folks, we're at the bottom of the barrel. We can now see the bottom of the barrel, was his exact quote, on ammunition in the West. You know, we keep giving all these 155 millimeter shells and, you know, hundreds of millions of other rounds of ammunition. There's a limit to that. Everyone's trying to ramp up industrial capacity to make more shells, both in Europe and in the United States. But it is a time-consuming and long process. It'll be 2025, the year 2025, before the United States may be able to be up to, I believe it's 85,000 shells per month. And that's still about 40% of what Ukraine would need on a daily basis. That's in 2025 at cranking out at high. Meanwhile, we've given 2 million shells of 155 and 105 millimeter shells. And we're now also getting into the fat. I mean, getting into the muscle. We've gone, the fat is gone in what we had. Now that we're into the muscle, and if we keep going at that rate that they're using it up in Ukraine just to maintain the line of contact, now you're going to get into the bone, meaning that if the United States were to suddenly get into an unexpected war, we won't have our own capacity to sustain a long-term combat operations. And it is an absolute article of faith. It's supposed to be that the U.S. government makes certain that we have the ability to defend our interest worldwide, and that our military is both trained, equipped, and sustained, and has the capacity to sustain itself long-term in combat if that's necessary. Right now, that is already in the yellow zone, and it's moving toward the red. And the longer it goes, then the more risk that we're going to take. And that's just unconscionable that we could potentially get into a war somewhere and run out of ammunition ourselves, or have insufficient ammunition to attain our military objectives, whatever they may be. And I think that there is now some growing recognition, and that means, here's the big significance of it all, we're going to have to change our strategy. We're going to have to change our expectations, what the United States wants to accomplish. We can no longer tell Ukraine, we're just going to support you as long as it takes until you decide you want to stop fighting, or that you win, because that's just not in the cards. We don't have the capacity to sustain that kind of an objective. And so we have to change to something that makes sense, something that's attainable. And look, folks, let me just tell you, the hard truth is there's really only one thing it can be, and that is we're going to have to start shifting focus to seeking a negotiated settlement. The idea is if you do it now, then you can carve out the best deal you can get for Ukraine so that they maintain political control over all the territory they currently hold, so that it offers a path to the future for them to build up their forces over time to defend themselves against any further Russian advancements and encroachments in the future. All of those things are still possible. If we ignore that, if the leaders in Ukraine ignore those emerging realities and says, no, we're not going to negotiate, we're not going to talk, we're not going to give up any of our land, we're going to keep fighting. The problem is that you don't have the capacity to do that now. Russia does. So even if this turns into a grinding war of attrition, Russia will win the grinding war of attrition because they have more personnel and they have their own sources of ammunition. And now that they are really cranking up in their industrial capacity in ways that are exceed what we can do. And so if we care about Ukraine, if we care about their people, then it is time to make some of these sober, cold-hearted, stone cold, true reality decisions and start trying to help them keep what they've got. Because if we continue to let Zelensky call the shots and we don't do anything different, then they're going to lose more than they have. And later on, they may be forced into a settlement that's not of their choosing and where they lose even more than what they have right now. That's just the reality of the situation. And we're going to see how this unfolds. But I think this comment yesterday by Kirby was the first shot across the bow, and we'll see what changes from here. That's your deep dive for the day. Thanks. We'll see you next time.